Hey guys, Rick Stone here from Stony Acres Gardening. Welcome to my channel. It's getting pretty close to being time for us to be starting our fall gardens. If you live anywhere in the cooler zones like zones 4, 5, 6, 7, time for planting your fall garden is going to be getting very close. But if your garden is anything like mine right now, there's not a lot of space in your garden. So today we're going to talk about what you can be doing to get a fall garden planted, even though your garden may be loaded with lots of other summer vegetables right now. How do we figure out how to get that fall garden going? So before we get started, make sure you get subscribed to my channel, click that notification bell so you get noticed every time I release new videos, and let's get going. So I've got 3 tips for you today that we're going to go over and talk about how we can get that garden planted. So the first thing that you ought to recognize is target planting times for those of us that live in the colder zones for getting fall gardens planted is about 8 weeks before our first frost date. For me, that's somewhere between August 1st and August 15th, which my garden at that time of the year is just loaded. We've got our tomatoes are just really starting to come into production. Our peppers are looking really good. We've got potatoes that aren't even close to being ready to harvest yet. Our sweet potatoes are just starting to sprawl. Our squashes are thriving. There's not a lot of space in our garden right now for planting fall crops. So how do we deal with that? What are some hints on how we can get a fall garden planted, even though we might be struggling finding the space in our garden? So here's 3 tips for you. So my first tip for finding space to plant a fall garden is to prioritize the root crops, okay? So here we're talking about things like carrots, beets, and turnips. Don't think that I've forgotten radishes. Radishes are an important fall crop too, but they get planted a little bit later. Our first priority in any space that we have in our garden right now is to get those fall root crops planted. So this is a good example for my garden. This space is where my spring peas were. About 3 weeks ago, we finished our spring peas. We cut those down and got started with a cover crop. So this is some buckwheat that we've planted as a cover crop. We're going to give this buckwheat another maybe 2.5 weeks, and then it'll be time for it to be turned into the soil. And then this will be our fall carrot bed. So top priority to those root crops. This is a great example. About the first half of this will be carrots, back half will end up being spinach, but this bed is the priority for those root crops. Let me show you another example. Okay, this is a much smaller space. Just 3 days ago, we harvested from this little bed, which is about 6 feet by 4 feet, all of our garlic. So now this is available for planting. So I'm going to put some compost in, let this sit for about 2 weeks, and then right around August 1st, which is our planting time, I'm going to plant this bed to turnips. And we'll have a nice harvest of turnips from this location. And then last but not least, we have this bed here. So this bed is actually planted with some spring carrots, and we've also got beets back here. We are going to be finishing these guys up within the next couple of weeks. And so this bed will be replanted again to fall beets. And so we'll squeeze in some beets in this bed. So the key here is to find those empty spaces and prioritize getting those root crops in. Make sure that you get those direct seeded, because there isn't anything we can do besides direct seeding with all of those root crops in order to get those planted on time for our fall garden. So my second tip for you is to do some indoor seed starting. So we have a lot of the fall cool season leafy greens that need to get started about 8 weeks before your first frost date. And you can do some succession planting as well, and maybe plant at 6 weeks also. But again, if you don't have any space in your garden, the priority ought to be keeping those warm season crops productive. So you can get your fall garden started by starting seedlings instead. So here we're talking about leafy greens, things like lettuce, spinach, kale, collards, all of the Asian greens like bok choy and pak choy. All of those can be started indoors using your indoor seed starting setup. So you can get those going under lights about 8 weeks before your first frost date, and then you can do another set maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. That will give you a couple of really good succession plantings. That first group will be ready to go out in your garden about 6 to 8 weeks after you've planted them. and think about what your garden will be like then. So for me, that lands me in the, the middle of September. By then, all of my potatoes are gone, my onions are out, a lot of my squash are finishing up, my tomatoes are kind of, running out, getting towards the end of their growing cycle as well, and so I have a ton more space. And so then I can transplant those seedlings out into the garden, and then there's my fall garden. And that second transplant, or that second planting indoors, can then go out a couple of weeks later and give you a good succession planting of all of those different leafy greens throughout the season. Now, when you do that second planting 2 or 3 weeks after the first, you could also include in that mosh and claytonia. Both of those are really hardy fall and winter crops that you could start indoors, then plant them outside when you have more space. So seed starting is an important part of having good timing for your fall garden. Now, what if you don't have an indoor seed starting setup? You don't have any lights or anything like that. Can you do it outside? Yes, you can. It's not going to be quite as successful. There's a lot of stressors this time of year for outdoor seed starting. So we've got a lot of heat, hot blazing sun, and a lot of pests. And so you will struggle a little bit more if you do it outside, but you could find a good spot that gets some morning sun and protected from the afternoon sun with some shade, and you could try doing some seed starting outside as well. So if you want to give that a go, go for it as well. So that's tip 2, do a lot of seed starting. And tip number 3 is to find some Brassica seedlings. So you've got a couple of options for you. It's too late in the year for you to start your own Brassica seedlings. If you've been watching my videos and you checked out this video up here, you will know that about 12 weeks before your first frost, you should have started some broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower indoors. If you didn't do that, then now is the time to go to one of your local private nurseries, not like a big box nursery, but one of your smaller local nurseries, and ask them if they can bring in some fall Brassica crops for you. So broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, all of those can be planted the seedlings can be planted about 4 weeks before your first frost date. So go to one of your nurseries now and ask them to get some of those ordered for you so that they arrive at roughly that 4-week mark. Lots of the growers will do small amounts of those crops in the fall. So if you go and specifically ask for them at your nursery, they ought to be able to bring those in, and then you'll have some fall Brassica crops as well. Or if you've been ahead of the game and gotten some Brassicas started, then you'll want to try and get those out about 4 weeks before your first frost date in the fall. So those are your 3 tips for finding space in your garden to get a fall garden started. First, prioritize those root crops in any empty space that you have. Second, get some seedlings started indoors. And third, go to a local nursery and find some Brassica starts for you. Now, I do have a few resources for you as well, especially on the seed starting side of things. So if you click right up here, that is a link to take you to our free seed starting ebook. Just sign up for that and you'll get a free copy of that ebook. We also have a free seed starting basics course, which is about a 40-minute course to kind of give you the background on how to get your own seedlings started. There's a link for that down in the description of this video. And we do have our Seed Starting Simplified course as well. That is a paid course, and there is a link in the description of this video for that as well that you can check out. So make sure you check out those resources and then get going on getting that fall garden planted. About 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost is when you want to target getting those planted. And that's for those of you that live in zones 4, 5, 6, and 7. So that is all I have for you for this week. Please make sure you get subscribed to my channel. Go follow us over on Instagram as well. We'd love to have you join us there, and we'll talk to you next week. Happy gardening.